The steel doors of the Pacific Fleet War Room hissed open, and Lieutenant Mara Dalton stepped inside. Her boots clicked against the polished deck, sharp and deliberate, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. She moved with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death decisions, yet there was something about her presence that made even seasoned officers pause. The black dossier in her hands felt heavier than its contents, though it wasn't thick. It was the kind of weight that spoke of secrets, of missions the public would never know, of truths too dangerous to utter. Every eye in the room flicked toward her. Most didn't recognize her. Most thought she was just another young officer, perhaps an ambitious lieutenant eager to see the inner workings of the fleet's nerve center. But Chief Petty Officer Blake Rourke recognized her instantly. Blake was leaning casually against the table, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. A Navy SEAL with a reputation for sarcasm sharper than any blade he carried, Blake had a way of testing people without them realizing it, until it was too late. "Hey, Lieutenant," he called, his voice carrying just enough amusement to draw attention. "You sure you're in the right room? This briefing's for decision makers." A ripple of soft chuckles spread across the room. A few junior officers even dared to glance at each other, eyebrows raised as if sharing a private joke. Mara Dalton didn't react. She didn't need to. She simply moved forward with measured steps and handed the black dossier to the nearest captain. Her gloves made a faint snap sound as she released it, and Blake caught that small detail, like a predator noticing a sudden twitch in its prey. The room had already begun to buzz with whispers when the Admiral at the head of the table finally spoke. His face, usually stoic and unreadable, had gone pale. He lifted the dossier, his eyes scanning the opening lines, and then froze. Every muscle in his face tightened. He looked at Mara, then to Blake and back again, as if verifying what his eyes had just confirmed. His voice was barely audible at first, rough with disbelief. "Lieutenant Dalton, welcome back." The single word "back" reverberated through the room. It was simple, but it carried a weight that made the air itself tense. Blake's smirk faltered. He wasn't sure why, but instinct screamed at him that the woman standing there was not just any lieutenant. She was someone, something, he didn't understand yet. Before he could form a question, the Admiral's voice rose, authoritative and commanding. "Everyone stand." Chairs scraped against the floor. Officers froze mid-motion. The entire war room rose in silence, eyes locked on Mara. Every admiral saluted, a display of respect usually reserved for legends, for men and women who had changed the course of battles, or for those considered ghosts of military history. Blake's heart raced. His training screamed at him that something extraordinary was happening, something beyond the usual protocols. He knew the Navy well enough to know that not even the most decorated officers would receive a salute like this in the war room. Certainly not a lieutenant who had been absent from active duty for years. The Admiral's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly, as he leaned forward and whispered, "God help us, you're needed again." Blake's pulse thumped audibly in his ears. He had questions, so many, but the first one, the one that burned hotter than any curiosity he had ever felt, was simple. Needed for what? The room was filled with an uneasy silence. No one dared speak. No one dared break the tension. Blake noticed the other officers stealing glances at Mara, studying her, measuring her. They were all trying to reconcile the quiet, composed woman before them with the almost mythic respect she commanded with nothing more than a single entrance. Finally, the Admiral gestured to the captain holding the dossier. "Mara, the situation is classified beyond anything you've encountered. What you accomplished during Operation Glass Veil, we need that expertise again." Blake's breath caught. Glass Veil was a legend among elite military units, whispered about in confidential briefings and studied only in the most secure tactical simulations. The operation had been a perfect storm of precision, cunning, and courage, so classified that even officers of Blake's clearance had only heard fragments. Rumors of the mission were wild, hostages rescued in enemy territory, a solo infiltration against impossible odds, lives saved that no one was supposed to know existed. And Mara Dalton was at the center of it all. Blake stepped closer, unable to resist the pull of curiosity. Operation Glass Veil, that was years ago. What's happening now? Mara's eyes, sharp and unreadable, flicked toward him. "You want to know?" she asked quietly, almost a whisper, but there was steel in her voice. "Good, because you're coming with me." Blake froze. "Me? Why me?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Because you're the only one here with the clearance to see what's inside that dossier." Blake's stomach twisted. His mind raced, trying to process how he, a SEAL, a soldier trained to survive the unimaginable, had suddenly been pulled into a mission that already smelled like danger and secrecy. The Admiral, noticing Blake's hesitation, added, "You do now." And if you refuse, his voice trailed off, but the unspoken threat lingered in the air. The Navy doesn't ask twice when lives and national security are at stake. Blake swallowed hard. He glanced at Mara. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes betrayed a storm forged in fire, betrayal, and loss. He felt the first threads of doubt and fear tangle with awe and curiosity. "Where do we start?" he finally asked, his voice low. Mara's lips curved in the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. "At the beginning," she said, and then she turned to leave. Blake hesitated, then followed. He had no idea what awaited them, only that it was something he was never meant to see. Something that could change everything he thought he knew about the Navy, about loyalty, and about survival. The steel doors of the war room closed behind them with a hiss that sounded louder than any gunshot. Outside, the world continued, oblivious. Inside, two soldiers prepared to step into a storm that history might never forgive them for entering. And in that moment, Blake realized he had no choice, not anymore. The moment was electric with tension. Every officer in that room had witnessed a legend return, but no one knew why or what storm Mara Dalton had just walked back into. Blake followed silently, heart pounding, as Mara led him toward a corridor lined with glowing tactical displays. Every step echoed like a warning, every shadow seemed alive. Because whatever was waiting for them outside that war room, it was patient, and it was dangerous. And Mara Dalton was the only one who had ever faced it and lived. The corridor's fluorescent lights flickered as Mara led Blake down the narrow passage, boots clicking in perfect rhythm. The air smelled faintly of ozone and electronics, a sterile scent that did nothing to mask the tension that clung to every corner of the Pacific Fleet's underground facility. Blake kept pace, trying not to let his eyes betray the storm of questions swirling in his mind. He had seen Marines and SEALs in life-and-death situations countless times, but this was different. This wasn't a raid. It wasn't a mission in the field. This was something else entirely. Something that made his training feel like a child's game. "Mara," Blake began cautiously, trying to bridge the growing silence. "I don't get it. Glass Veil, that mission was classified so deep even we only heard whispers. Why would the Navy, why would the Admirals bring it back now?" She didn't respond immediately. Her gloved hands gripped the dossier tightly, knuckles whitening. Her eyes were fixed ahead, unwavering, but Blake noticed the faint tremor in her jaw, barely perceptible, but there. Finally she spoke, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Because whatever is happening now, it's connected to Glass Veil. Everything we thought ended didn't, not really." Blake frowned. "Connected? How? That mission was a disaster hidden under a veil of secrecy. I thought it was over, finished." Mara glanced at him, her gaze piercing. "You don't understand. Some ghosts, they never die, and some mistakes never stay buried." Blake swallowed hard. His instincts were screaming, but he tried to focus on what he knew: tactical situations, weapons, survival. Ghosts and mistakes weren't part of his calculus until now. They reached a security checkpoint, a biometric lock glowing ominously in red. Mara slid the dossier into a scanning cradle, and the system blinked in recognition. Her hand went to the keypad, entering a code Blake had never seen. Within seconds, the door hissed open. Blake's curiosity burned. "How do you still have access to this level? You've been off the books for years." Mara didn't answer, stepping through the door as if the question didn't exist. Blake followed. The next room was dimly lit, dominated by a massive holographic map suspended in midair. The map displayed the South Pacific, dotted with flashing red markers that pulsed ominously. Blake's eyes widened. One of the markers read, "USS Raven lost contact." Blake's voice caught. "The Raven, that's a submarine, missing for 36 hours. The Admiral's voice came from behind them, low and tense. "The Raven was carrying something we can't afford to lose, classified beyond the public record. We have reason to believe it's now in hostile territory." Blake felt the weight of the room press down on him. A missing submarine wasn't just a problem, it was a global incident waiting to happen. Mara's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer to the hologram, studying the markers. "This pattern, signal fragmentation, this is the same as Glass Veil." Blake felt a chill. Glass Veil had been infamous not just for the operation itself, but for the secrecy surrounding its communications. Signals scrambled so thoroughly that only a handful of operators could decode them. The fact that he saw it again now meant something was repeating, something dangerous. "Are we dealing with the same enemy?" Blake asked, voice low. The Admiral's lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't know, but the Raven was transporting a device, something irreplaceable. If it falls into the wrong hands," his words trailed off, leaving Blake to fill in the terrifying possibilities. nuclear codes, advanced weaponry, intelligence that could topple governments. Before anyone could speak further, the holographic screens flickered violently. Static erupted, filling the room with a crackling roar. Blake's instincts screamed at him to move, but the noise wasn't physical, it was communication. And then, through the interference, a voice emerged, distorted, deliberate, and cold. "Send her." The words cut through the room like a knife. Every head turned toward Mara. Blake felt his pulse spike. The Admiral's face drained of color. "Did you hear that?" he demanded. Mara's eyes didn't move from the hologram, her jaw clenched. She exhaled slowly, a visible effort to maintain control. "It can't be," she whispered. Blake's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "Can't be what?" The voice spoke again, this time clearer, resonating in every corner of the room. "Send her." The room erupted into chaos. Officers scrambled to their consoles, analysts shouted over static, and security teams rushed toward exits. But Mara remained calm, almost unnervingly so. Her eyes, however, betrayed a storm that no one else could see. Blake stepped closer, his voice firm. "Mara, who is it? Who's calling for you?" Her hands tightened around the dossier. "A ghost," she said quietly. "A ghost we thought was dead." Blake froze. He had heard stories, tales whispered among SEAL teams and special operations units, about a man named Aldrich Voss. Brilliant, ruthless, a soldier who had betrayed his own team. Presumed dead after a catastrophic mission, his existence was almost mythic. And yet, the voice had just called for Mara Dalton by name. The Admiral swallowed hard. "Commander Aldrich Voss," he admitted. "We thought he died during Glass Veil. We were wrong." Blake's stomach turned. "That's impossible. He was obliterated, the reports." Mara's gaze snapped to him, eyes blazing. "He isn't dead, not really, and he's the reason we're here right now." The room fell silent again, the only sound the faint hum of the holographic map. Everyone seemed to sense the weight of her words. A man who had been erased from existence, capable of killing without hesitation, was alive, and he wanted Mara Dalton. Blake swallowed, heart hammering. Back for what? Mara didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked toward the blinking red marker on the Raven, then back to Blake. "He wants revenge, and he wants closure, but not just any closure, mine." Blake felt his pulse spike. "Why you?" She didn't blink. "Because I stopped him once, alone, and he's never forgiven me for it." A cold shiver ran down Blake's spine. He had trained for ambushes, hostage rescues, and clandestine extractions. Nothing, not a single scenario, had prepared him for the realization that he was now caught in a game between a living legend and a ghost who had survived death itself. The Admiral's voice cut through the tension. "Lieutenant Dalton, Chief Rourke, you are being deployed immediately. The Raven's location is fluid and the threat is escalating. You must intercept." Blake glanced at Mara. She looked calm, almost serene, but her eyes betrayed the weight of the history she carried, the ghosts she had faced, and the battles that had been waged alone. He realized, with a sinking certainty, that he was about to follow her into a storm unlike any he had ever known. And that the world as they knew it would never be the same again. Mara turned, her expression unreadable, but her voice held a subtle edge of urgency. "Let's move, Blake. Every second we wait, the Raven drifts further into enemy waters. And Aldrich, he's not just waiting, he's planning." Blake followed silently, nerves taut, heart hammering. With every step, the corridor seemed to stretch longer, shadows twisting as if alive. He knew one truth: by the time they reached the Raven, nothing would be simple, nothing would be safe, and the ghost of Glass Veil, the man who should have been dead, was already waiting. The Pacific winds whipped across the flight deck of the stealth helicopter as Mara Dalton and Blake Rourke were strapped in, the roar of the rotors drowning out everything except the pounding of their hearts. Below them, the ocean stretched endlessly, a dark mirror reflecting the storm that was already brewing, not in the sky, but in the waters where the USS Raven drifted, silent and vulnerable. Blake tried to focus on the mission brief the Admiral had given them, but every second felt like a countdown to disaster. His mind raced. A missing submarine, a rogue commander presumed dead, a classified device that could topple nations, and the woman next to him, calm as ever, carrying a weight he didn't yet understand. "You look tense," Mara said without turning to him. Her voice was steady, almost casual, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. Blake exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Tense doesn't begin to cover it. You're calm, though. Aren't you at least a little worried?" She finally looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Worried doesn't get the job done. You'll learn that fast. Worrying just slows you down when the ocean is trying to kill you and the enemy is already inside your head." Blake opened his mouth to respond, but the helicopter tilted sharply. Mara's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder, anchoring him. "Focus," she said. "We're approaching the Raven's last known coordinates. The currents there are unpredictable. This isn't just a rescue, it's a trap, and traps are dangerous." Blake felt the chill settle into his bones. She wasn't exaggerating. The Raven had vanished from radar hours ago. No distress signal, no communication, nothing. A submarine lost in the Pacific was bad enough, but when a rogue operative like Aldrich Voss was involved, Blake realized they weren't just rescuing a crew, they were stepping into a battlefield designed specifically to destroy them. The helicopter descended over the water, the dark waves reflecting the glow of the night sky. Mara's eyes scanned the horizon, fingers tapping a rapid rhythm on her thigh, a silent calculation only she understood. Blake couldn't help but notice the subtle tension in her jaw. Even Mara Dalton, calm and lethal, carried the weight of history in her every motion. "Tell me," Blake said cautiously, "you stopped Voss before. How? You never struck me as the kind of operator who works solo." Her gaze snapped to him. I didn't have a choice. Glass Veil, it ate everyone else." Blake felt a chill. He had heard whispers of Glass Veil, an impossible infiltration, a near-suicidal rescue, and a woman who walked into the fire alone. But hearing it from her, knowing she had survived where others hadn't, it made the legend human, terrifying, and real. The helicopter shuddered as they neared the last known location of the Raven. The waters below were eerily calm, a deceptive stillness. Mara leaned forward, peering through night vision optics, her voice low. "It's here," she whispered, "and we're not alone." Blake followed her gaze. The radar displayed a single, fast-moving blip approaching from the west, a vessel moving at impossible speed, almost too precise to be human-piloted. Blake's jaw tightened. "That can't be good." Mara didn't respond. Her hands moved over the helicopter's tactical controls, inputting coordinates, marking trajectories, and calculating intercept points. Every move was deliberate, every decision weighted by the lives at stake. "They're expecting us," she said finally, voice tight. "Voss is here. He knows we're coming, and he's already prepared." Blake's stomach twisted. "Prepared for what?" She didn't answer. Her eyes never left the radar. Everything. The helicopter tilted sharply, and the pilot shouted over the rotor's roar. Mara reached down and grabbed a sidearm from her harness, checking the magazine in one smooth motion. Blake followed suit, feeling the adrenaline spike in his veins. "You know," Blake said, his voice low, "I didn't think I'd be on a mission like this tonight. Missing submarines, rogue commanders, it's a lot for one evening." Mara glanced at him, a faint smirk tugging at her lips despite the tension. "You think this is the worst of it?" Blake's brow furrowed. "There's worse." Mara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tapped a series of coordinates into the display. The Raven isn't just drifting, it's being herded, and whoever's doing it wants a show. Blake felt his pulse spike. He had been in ambushes, firefights, and hostage rescues, but the idea that an entire submarine, hundreds of miles at sea, could be manipulated by a single mind, it was beyond tactical reasoning. It was almost supernatural. The helicopter banked sharply, approaching the water at a low altitude. Mara reached down and pulled out a compact submersible pod, its sleek black form gleaming under the cockpit lights. "This is our ride," she said. "Once we reach the coordinates, we go in silent. No radio, no comms, nothing that can give him a trace of our approach." Blake's heart hammered. Silent infiltration into a submarine lost in hostile waters alone, with Voss waiting, sounds manageable. Mara shot him a look sharp enough to cut steel. "Manageable, don't mistake training for luck. You think you can survive this because you're a SEAL. You survive this because I make you survive it." Blake swallowed, the weight of the mission settling on him like a lead vest. He realized in that moment that every skill he had honed, the years of grueling training, the countless missions, wouldn't be enough. Not alone, not without Mara. The helicopter began its final descent. The water below roiled as if sensing the storm to come. Mara's hands moved with precision over the pod's controls, checking every seal, every lock, every system. Blake watched her, noticing the subtle tension in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands that she didn't allow herself to acknowledge. "She's calm," Blake muttered to himself, "too calm." But Mara wasn't calm, not really. Her calm was a mask, a necessity honed through years of operating in impossible situations. She had faced Voss before. She had survived where others hadn't. And now, she was stepping into the eye of a storm that even she wasn't fully prepared for. The pod hit the water with a quiet splash, submerging instantly. The helicopter hovered briefly, then ascended back into the night, leaving them alone in the inky black ocean. Blake felt the cold creep into his bones. The pod moved silently, a shadow gliding beneath the waves. Ahead the Raven loomed, a dark shape against the faint phosphorescent glow of the ocean. But something was wrong. The sub wasn't just adrift, it was moving, maneuvering in ways that suggested it was being actively controlled. Blake's pulse jumped, it's moving on its own. Mara's eyes narrowed, not on its own, Voss. Blake's stomach twisted. This was no ordinary rogue operative. This was a man who had survived death, who had orchestrated disasters, and who now held the Raven and its mysterious cargo like a chess piece. And somehow he had anticipated their arrival. Mara adjusted her grip on her sidearm. We get in, we secure the crew, we retrieve the device, and we stop him, that's all. Blake swallowed hard, and if he's waiting for us inside. She didn't flinch, then we fight, and we survive, or we die trying. Blake looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. Not the legend whispered about in classified corridors, not the calm operator who walked through the war room and made admirals rise in salute. He saw a woman who had carried ghosts, who had faced death and survived, and who now carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. The pod approached the Raven. The shadow of the submarine grew larger, the water dark and foreboding. Blake could feel the tension radiating from Mara, tight and precise, like a coiled spring ready to snap. "Ready?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, yet cutting through the tension like a blade. Blake nodded, gripping his weapon, "As I'll ever be." Mara gave a single, small nod. "Then let's see if the ghosts of the past are ready for us." The pod slowed, gliding silently toward the Raven's hull. Every second stretched into eternity. Every heartbeat echoed in Blake's chest. The shadow of Voss, of Glass Vale, of all the dangers that lay ahead, seemed to loom over them. And then a faint light flickered from the submarine's bridge. Not a signal of life, not a distress call, but a deliberate, taunting pulse. Blake felt his stomach knot. "He's expecting us," he muttered. Mara didn't answer. She just readied herself, eyes sharp, every muscle poised for the storm to come. Because they weren't walking into a rescue mission. They were walking into Voss's world. And he had been waiting for this moment for years. The submersible pod glided silently through the ink-black waters, each meter bringing Mara, Dalton, and Blake Rourke closer to the USS Raven. Below them, the ocean stretched like a vast void, cold and indifferent. Above them, the faint phosphorescent glow of marine life danced across the waves, giving the scene an otherworldly aura, beautiful, yes, but deceptive. Danger lurked beneath every shadow. Blake watched Mara's hands, precise, controlled, tapping commands into the pod's console with fluidity that suggested decades of practice. Every movement she made screamed experience, calm, lethal, perfect. But he couldn't ignore the subtle tension in her jaw, the almost imperceptible flick of her eyes scanning the darkness outside the viewport. Something was coming, and Mara knew it. He swallowed, voice low. "You know he's in there. Voss, he's waiting for you. How do you do this? After everything, after Glass Vale, how do you face him?" Mara's eyes met his for a brief moment, cold and unreadable. "Because if I don't, he wins, and I won't let him." Blake felt a shiver run down his spine. There was fire in her gaze, controlled, precise, but intense enough to make him believe she had survived things no one should ever endure. And yet he also sensed a shadow behind that fire, something deeper, a history Mara had carried alone. The pod's light swept over the Raven, a massive shadow against the black water. The sub was eerily silent, almost too still. Blake tensed. Where is everyone? Shouldn't there be signs of life? Mara's hand hovered over her sidearm. They're alive, or at least most of them. But silence is the first weapon Voss uses. Blake's stomach twisted. Voss had always been methodical, sadistic in ways that left survivors scarred for life. Blake had heard whispers from the special ops community, stories about a man who didn't just fight battles. He manipulated fear, weaponized trust, and destroyed the will of anyone who dared oppose him. And now he was here, alive, orchestrating a trap. The pod's proximity alarms began to beep softly. Mara's eyes darted to the console. Pressure sensors indicate multiple hull breaches, not catastrophic, but precise, surgical. Blake's brow furrowed. He's rigged the sub. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for a hatch release, flipping the switches with deft fingers. The pod docked with the Raven's access port. A quiet hiss, a mechanical click, and they were aligned. Mara turned to Blake. "Once we go in, it's just us. No backup, no extraction. Voss will be ready." Blake nodded, swallowing. "I'm ready." She didn't respond. Instead, she opened the hatch. Darkness swallowed them as they slipped inside. The interior of the Raven was cold and metallic, the faint hum of the sub's engines vibrating through the floor. Blake's senses went on high alert. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every metallic echo could hide a threat. Mara led the way, moving silently down the narrow corridor. Blake followed, gun raised, senses sharpened. The sub's interior was unnervingly quiet. No chatter, no footsteps, just the subtle hum of machinery and the occasional drip of condensation. Then the lights flickered. Blake froze, Mara didn't. She stopped, listening. A voice echoed through the sub's intercom system, distorted and deliberate. Mara. Blake's pulse spiked. How is he? Mara's eyes hardened, alive and watching, always watching. The voice continued, calm and mocking. Come find me, Mara, or more will die. Blake's stomach turned. He felt the same chill that had gripped him back in the war room, the awareness that this man, thought dead, was manipulating events with surgical precision. He wasn't just a rogue operative. He was a predator, stalking them through the very vessel meant to protect them. Mara's jaw tightened. He's never forgiven me for what happened during Glass Veil, and now he wants retribution. Blake's mind raced. Revenge on you. Why you? He should be after the sub, the device, the crew. Why you? Her eyes, for the first time, flickered with something darker than anger, something Blake recognized as raw, unprocessed fear and determination intertwined. Because I stopped him once, alone, and he hasn't forgiven me, not in 10 years, not in a single second. Blake felt his stomach knot. This wasn't just a mission. This was a personal vendetta. He realized that Voss wasn't going to wait for them to uncover the sub's secrets. He wasn't just an obstacle. They were walking into a man who had planned this moment for years, a man who had survived death itself to get to Mara Dalton. The corridor narrowed. Blake's flashlight swept over the walls, catching the gleam of polished steel. Mara's movements were precise, almost ritualistic. Every step, every tap on the console, every glance toward the darkened sections of the sub was calculated. Then the lights flickered again, longer this time. Blake's heartbeat pounded in his ears. From the darkness, a faint shadow moved across the wall, a figure, tall, lean, impossibly silent. Blake froze. Mara. She didn't turn, her hand moved, and the sound of her sidearm being cocked echoed softly in the corridor. Stay calm, she whispered. He wants you afraid. That's his weapon. Not bullets, not explosives, fear. The shadow shifted again, and Blake realized it was following them, matching their movements perfectly. Every step he took, the figure mirrored. Every motion, every breath seemed anticipated. His pulse raced. He shouldn't even be here, Blake muttered under his breath. Mara didn't answer. She knew. She had expected this. She had anticipated this. And yet, even she carried the memory of the man he had been, the ruthless predator who had taken everything from her, who had survived when everyone else had fallen. The light snapped fully on. Blake spun, weapon raised. The corridor was empty. A cold exhale brushed past his ear. Hello, Mara. Blake spun again, gun trained. Nothing. Silence. Mara's hand tightened around her sidearm. Her voice was quiet, steady, but every word carried the weight of a warning. He's here, and he's been inside the sub since we arrived. Blake's blood ran cold. How is that possible? Voss is never just in one place, Mara said. He's always 3 steps ahead. Every door, every sensor, every hatch. I know he's already predicted our moves. That's why I survived before and why we might just survive this time. Blake swallowed, gripping his weapon tighter. So what do we do? She didn't flinch. We find the crew, we secure the device, and we confront him. That's all, or at least all that we can do. Blake's heart hammered. And if he kills us? Mara's eyes locked on his. Then we make sure he regrets it. Suddenly a faint light flickered at the end of the corridor. Blake's stomach sank. It wasn't a normal sublight. It pulsed rhythmically, deliberately, almost like a heartbeat. He's waiting, Mara whispered. Blake's voice caught. We walk into a trap. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. No, we walk into history. The air in the corridor seemed to thicken. Every sound, the hum of the engines, the drip of water, the faint echo of their footsteps was amplified. Blake realized they were not alone. Voss had transformed the sub into his personal hunting ground, every passageway a gauntlet designed to disorient, frighten, and control them. Then, without warning, a hatch slammed shut behind them with a metallic crash, the echo reverberating through the sub like a gunshot. Blake spun, but the pod's docking clamps held them in place. A voice, smooth and cold as ice, filled the corridor's intercom system. Welcome back, Mara. Blake's heart stopped. Mara's expression hardened, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something he hadn't seen before: recognition, fear, and fury, all tangled together. "Voss," she whispered, "so it begins." The sub hummed ominously around them. The trap had been sprung, and Mara Dalton was walking straight into the storm she had survived once before, only this time Blake was with her. The corridor was silent except for the faint hum of the Raven's engines, each vibration traveling through the steel floor and into Blake's bones. Every fiber of his being screamed danger, yet Mara Dalton moved ahead with the precision of a predator, calm and unflinching. Blake tried to match her pace, but he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down like a physical force. "Keep your eyes open," Mara whispered, barely audible over the faint metallic echo of their footsteps. "He's here, and he's been waiting for this moment." Blake swallowed hard. "I've heard the stories, Mara, glass veil, Voss, but nothing prepares you for this." Mara's jaw tightened. "Stories don't matter. What matters is surviving it. We don't survive by thinking about the past. We survive by acting." Blake nodded, adrenaline surging. He had trained for this type of infiltration, for close quarters combat, for hostile environments, but he had never encountered a predator like Aldrich Voss, a man who survived against impossible odds, who played psychological warfare with precision, and who had been meticulously planning this confrontation for years. The corridor forked into two narrow passageways. Mara stopped, scanning the walls, the floor, and the ceiling for traps or sensors. Blake's flashlight swept over every shadow, every detail, but he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was already enveloping them. Suddenly a faint hiss echoed from the right-hand passage. Blake froze. Mara's hand shot out, pressing against his shoulder. "Tripwire pressure sensor," she murmured. "He's testing us, don't trigger it." Blake's pulse spiked. "So what do we do?" Mara's eyes flicked to the side passage. "We go left, less predictable." They moved cautiously, silent as ghosts. The air grew colder, the metallic tang sharper. Blake noticed subtle scratches along the walls, as if something or someone had passed through recently. Every instinct he had honed screamed that they were not alone. Then came the first strike. A panel on the left wall exploded outward, sending shards of steel and sparks into the air. Blake reacted instantly, diving to cover behind a bulkhead. Mara didn't flinch. Her sidearm rose, muzzle glowing faintly as she fired a precise series of controlled shots. The hallways erupted with light and sound, and Blake felt the raw force of the attack reverberate through his chest. Blake peeked over the bulkhead, eyes wide. Figures darted in the shadows, automated drones, rigged by Voss to mimic human movement, designed to disorient, confuse, and delay them. "He's not here yet," Mara shouted over the chaos. "This is just the beginning." Blake moved beside her, his weapon sweeping the corridor with calculated precision. The drones were sophisticated, almost lifelike, yet Mara's training allowed her to predict their movements. She was faster, sharper, and eerily calm as she neutralized each threat. Blake realized with a jolt this wasn't just combat training. Mara Dalton had survived traps like this before, every nerve, every reflex honed by years of solitary battle. They advanced side by side, clearing the corridors of mechanical threats, but with each step the tension thickened. The hum of the Raven's engines seemed to grow louder, almost like a heartbeat, counting down to the inevitable confrontation. Then the lights flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Blake's breath caught. Mara moved instinctively, activating the pod's night vision system. The green glow revealed shadows shifting along the walls, silent, deliberate, and unnerving. "He's here," she whispered, voice calm but tense. Blake's stomach twisted. "Where?" Before Mara could answer, a door slammed shut at the far end of the corridor. The lights flickered back on, revealing Aldrich Voss standing in the center, arms crossed, a cold, calculating smile on his face. Blake froze. Mara's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something: anger, fear, history, hidden behind the calm exterior. "You came," Voss said smoothly, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "I wondered if you would." Always predictable, Mara Dalton. Mara's hand tightened around her sidearm. "Voss, I should have finished this years ago." He tilted his head, amusement flickering in his cold eyes. "And now you're just a ghost chasing another ghost. Did you think you could stop me?" Blake stepped forward, weapon raised. "Step aside, Dalton, let me handle." "Stay back," Mara snapped, cutting him off. Her voice was iron, commanding, leaving no room for hesitation. "This is mine." Blake hesitated, seeing the intensity in her gaze. He realized she wasn't just confronting Voss for the mission. She was confronting the man who had haunted her for over a decade, the man who had taken everything from her during Glass Veil. This fight was personal. Voss smiled, stepping closer, his movements deliberate, measured. You survived then, and yet here you are, still alive, still arrogant enough to think you can stop me. Mara's hand didn't waver. I'm not stopping you, I'm ending you. The tension exploded. Voss lunged, fast as lightning, but Mara was faster. Her training and instincts kicked in, a blur of motion, precision strikes, and calculated evasion. Blake watched, awestruck, as she neutralized Voss's advance with fluid, deadly efficiency. Every motion was honed by years of survival, every reflex trained in moments where death had been inevitable. Voss stumbled, more surprised than hurt. His smile returned, colder, sharper. Impressive, but you're predictable, you always were. Mara didn't flinch, I learned, and now you'll pay for every life you destroyed. Blake felt a wave of fear and awe wash over him. Voss was still alive, still calculating, still lethal. But Mara Dalton had something he didn't. She had history, experience, and a survival instinct that refused to yield. The corridor seemed to close in around them, every shadow a potential threat. Voss moved again, faster this time, testing, probing, pushing Mara to the limits. She countered with skill, precision, and raw determination. Every clash, every movement carried the weight of their history: Glass Veil, the years lost, the lives destroyed, and the unresolved vendetta that had festered in silence. Blake realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle for vengeance, for closure, for the ghosts of the past. Voss's eyes narrowed. You think this changes anything? You can't stop what's coming. The Raven, the device, all of it belongs to me. Mara's jaw tightened. You belong to the past, Voss. This ends tonight. Blake moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary, but Mara's voice stopped him. Watch, learn, survive. We end this together, or not at all. Voss lunged again, faster, more ruthless, but Mara anticipated every move, every strike, every intention. She was a force of nature, a storm he had never expected, a ghost who refused to die. And then, just as the battle reached its peak, the corridor lights flickered, and a faint alarm began to sound, the Raven systems detecting intruders, internal security responding to Voss's manipulations. Blake's mind raced. The crew, we need to secure them. Mara's eyes didn't leave Voss. Not yet, we finish this first. Voss laughed, a cold, hollow sound that reverberated through the sub. Finish, oh Mara, we're just getting started. The air thickened with tension. Every heartbeat was amplified, every second stretched into eternity. The first strike had been made, the first confrontation had occurred, and yet the storm was far from over. The corridors of the Raven twisted around Mara Dalton and Blake Rourke like the inside of a predator's lair. Every step they took echoed ominously against the steel walls, a reminder that Voss had turned this sub into a deadly maze. Every hatch could conceal a trap, every shadow could harbor death. Blake kept close to Mara, his weapon raised, his senses taut. He had witnessed many lethal situations before, but nothing prepared him for the combination of psychological warfare and physical threat that Aldrich Voss wielded. He wasn't just trying to kill them, he was testing them, manipulating their fear, using the submarine itself as a weapon. Mara's calm exterior never faltered. Every step she took was deliberate, her eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor ahead, hands moving over her sidearm with a fluid precision honed by countless life-or-death missions. But Blake noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible quickening of her breath. The stakes weren't just the crew or the device, they were personal. Voss had always been strategic, meticulous, almost surgical in his approach, and Blake now understood why Mara had survived Glass Veil. She had faced him before, alone, and lived to tell the story. The fact that she was willing to face him again under these conditions spoke volumes about her resolve and her fearlessness. Ahead, the corridor opened into the Raven's central chamber. The space was dominated by the hum of the ship's core systems and an array of consoles, their green and amber lights flickering like the heartbeat of a living organism. At the far end, Voss stood, relaxed, almost casual, as if he owned not just the sub but the ocean itself. Blake's stomach tightened. He's too calm, he muttered. Mara's eyes narrowed. That calm, that's the deadliest part. Voss's voice cut through the hum of the ship. I've been waiting for this, Mara. 36 hours to be precise. 36 hours of silence, and you finally arrive. Mara stepped forward, her stance lethal, coiled like a spring. You shouldn't have survived Glass Veil. Voss smiled, cold and sharp. Neither should you. Blake felt a surge of tension unlike anything he had experienced. The space between Mara and Voss crackled with history, anger, fear, vengeance. Every word, every glance carried the weight of a decade-old vendetta. Suddenly Voss moved, fast, almost imperceptibly fast. Blake reacted instinctively, firing a warning shot at a panel near Voss, sparks flying. But Voss was already behind cover, moving with a predatory grace that defied explanation. Mara didn't hesitate, she advanced, matching his pace, every motion a calculated strike. Blake followed, covering her flank, realizing that this wasn't just a fight, it was a chess match, and they were all players in a deadly game. Then the alarm system blared, lights flashing red. Blake's heart leapt. "The crew," he shouted, "we need to secure them." Mara didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were fixed on Voss, analyzing, calculating. "First him," she said finally. "Then the device, then the crew, in that order." Blake's pulse raced. "You sure?" Mara's gaze was unyielding. "Positive, he's the key. Without stopping him, everything else fails." Voss's laugh echoed through the chamber. "You really think you can stop me, that you can outmaneuver me after all these years?" Mara advanced, sidestepping a trap that Voss had set, wires triggering miniature charges along the floor. She moved like a shadow, fluid and precise, her focus absolute. Blake covered her, neutralizing automated defenses that Voss had strategically placed to slow their progress. As they closed the distance, Voss made his move, lunging toward Mara with a ferocity that only someone surviving years of isolation and obsession could muster. Mara countered, parrying and striking with lethal precision. Sparks flew as metal clashed, their movements a blur of calculated violence. Blake realized that Voss wasn't just fighting physically, he was playing with Mara's mind. Every strike, every maneuver was meant to unbalance her, to force a misstep that could be fatal. Mara's jaw tightened. "You never change, Voss, still predictable." Voss smirked. "And you never learn, Mara, always trying to control what you can't." Blake's head spun with the intensity of the confrontation, every moment amplifying the danger. Then, suddenly, Voss darted toward the console at the center of the chamber, the control panel for the Raven's main systems. "Stop him," Blake shouted. Mara reacted instantly, lunging to intercept him. A violent struggle ensued near the console, wires sparking, alarms blaring, and Blake realizing that Voss's ultimate goal wasn't just them, it was the sub itself. "The device," Mara shouted, "it's in the core. If he triggers it, everything dies." Blake's stomach dropped. The classified device Voss had been after, the one the Navy had been desperate to recover, was now at risk. Every second mattered. Voss twisted, trying to push past Mara, and she slammed him against the console. Sparks flew as a jagged edge of metal scraped across his arm. He hissed, impressed, "You've grown stronger." Mara's gaze was steel. "I've learned from the past. Unlike you, I survive." Blake realized the fight was not just about physical dominance, it was psychological. Voss was trying to provoke Mara, to make her act recklessly, and she, despite the weight of history and the personal vendetta, remained unshaken. The struggle escalated. Voss lunged again, forcing Mara back, closer to the core's containment area. Blake moved in to assist, tackling Voss to the floor. The man was a whirlwind of strength and cunning, but together they forced him back. Mara pressed forward, delivering precise strikes that left Voss staggered. "This ends tonight," she said, voice low and deadly. Voss's eyes glittered with a mixture of rage and respect. "You think you've won," he sneered. "You haven't even begun to understand the plan." Blake's pulse raced. "What plan?" Voss smirked, blood trickling from a shallow cut on his lip. "The Raven, the device, you're just in time to witness history. But history isn't yours to write, Mara." Mara's eyes narrowed. "It ends here, or I die trying." The corridor shuddered violently. Blake's stomach lurched. He realized that Voss had triggered part of the Raven systems, sending the sub into an unsteady tilt. Alarms blared, red lights flashing, machinery groaning under pressure. "We need to secure the device," Mara shouted. "Move." Blake followed, covering her as they sprinted toward the sub's core. Sparks rained down from overhead conduits, the air thick with tension and heat. Every second was a battle against Voss, against the ship, against time itself. They reached the core chamber. Mara moved with deliberate precision, working to access the device while Blake kept watch for Voss, who was now recovering and circling them like a predator. "You think you can contain it," Voss taunted. "You can't even contain yourselves." Mara's hands moved deftly over the device's containment controls. "We don't have to contain ourselves, we have to contain you." Voss lunged again, but Mara anticipated the move, stepping aside and delivering a sharp strike that sent him sprawling. Blake quickly moved to restrain him, securing the rogue operative as the ship groaned and shuddered violently. The device's core began to stabilize under Mara's skilled hands. Blake exhaled, adrenaline surging, realizing they were moments away from disaster or salvation. Mara glanced at Blake, her gaze intense. "We're not out yet, but this is our chance." Blake nodded, realizing that the battle was far from over. Voss was still alive, still dangerous, but for the first time in years, Mara Dalton had the upper hand. The hum of the Raven's engines reverberated through the metal corridors, a low, ominous pulse that mirrored the rapid beat of Blake Rourke's heart. Sparks rained from damaged conduits overhead, sending flickering shadows across the walls, and the faint smell of burning circuitry stung his nostrils. Every nerve in his body screamed danger, but he followed Mara Dalton without hesitation, knowing she was the only anchor keeping them alive. They had reached the sub's core chamber, and Mara was crouched over the device, a sleek, metallic object encased in layers of security. It pulsed faintly, like a living heart, and Blake realized that any wrong move could set off a chain reaction that would destroy the sub and everyone aboard. Voss, restrained against the wall, was watching them with a mixture of amusement and malice. His dark eyes flicked to Mara, and Blake felt the weight of history pressing down on them both. "You really think you can stop me?" Voss sneered despite his position. "You've survived before, yes, but surviving isn't winning. You're just prolonging the inevitable." Mara didn't respond verbally. Her hands moved over the device with fluid precision, fingers dancing across touch-sensitive panels, bypassing layers of security codes only someone with her training could navigate. Every motion radiated focus, determination, and a history of confronting impossible odds. Blake's eyes darted to the device. "What is it exactly?" he whispered, but Mara's glance told him, "Not now." Timing mattered. Every second could tip the balance between survival and annihilation. The sub shuddered violently, throwing them off balance. Alarms blared, red lights bathing the chamber in a chaotic glow. Blake felt the heat from overheated conduits, heard the metallic groan of the vessel straining under pressure. Voss chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Panic, fear, chaos, all the tools of survival," he murmured. "And yet here you are, calm and focused, fascinating." Mara didn't flinch. "You taught me one thing, Voss," she said, voice low and deadly. "You taught me to survive, and now I use that knowledge against you." Voss's smirk faltered slightly, the first crack in his unshakable demeanor. Mara's eyes were fixed on the device, calculating, precise, unwavering. Blake moved closer, scanning the room for threats. Automated traps, hidden explosives, secondary security measures, they were all potential hazards. But Mara had anticipated every move. Every trap she bypassed, every wire she cut, was a testament to her experience, and Blake realized that she was operating on a level beyond his own understanding. Suddenly, the sub's hull groaned, sending vibrations through the floor. The Raven had entered a dangerous thermal layer in the Pacific, a region where pressure fluctuations could tear the vessel apart if not managed carefully. Blake glanced at the device. One wrong touch, one misstep, and the entire submarine could implode. "We don't have much time," Mara said, eyes still on the controls. "Voss knows we're here. He's waiting for a distraction." Blake turned just in time to see a panel spark violently. Voss had activated a secondary system, a series of automated defenses meant to slow their progress. Laser-like cutting beams shot across the floor, slicing through metal conduits. Blake dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly arcs. Mara didn't pause. She moved with impossible precision, navigating the hazards as if they didn't exist. Blake followed, covering her as she reached the device's core containment unit. Voss struggled against his restraints, fury flashing across his face. "You can't stop it. You don't understand the power you're holding." Mara glanced at him briefly, her eyes cold. "I understand enough, and I understand you." Blake realized that what Mara understood was more than technical skill. It was strategy, psychology, history, and survival instincts distilled into a single lethal focus. Voss had underestimated her once. He would not do so again. The sub shuddered again, louder this time, shaking the walls and sending loose equipment clattering across the floor. Blake and Mara were momentarily thrown off balance, but Mara's hands remained steady on the device. "Almost there," she muttered, her voice tight with concentration. Voss's eyes narrowed. "You think you can end this without consequence? You think I'll just disappear?" Mara's hand moved with sudden, precise motion, and the containment unit clicked into stabilization mode. The device's pulse slowed, its dangerous energy contained. Blake exhaled, relief washing over him, but it was short-lived. The sub groaned again, this time louder, and Blake's stomach dropped. Structural integrity was failing. They were running out of time. Mara glanced at Blake, urgency sharp in her gaze. We need to evacuate the crew, now. Blake nodded, following her as she led the way through the corridors, navigating the maze of shadows, sparks, and danger. Each step was calculated, but the tension never lifted. Every corner could hide a trap, every shadow could conceal Voss himself. They reached the crew quarters, finding the personnel huddled together, terrified but alive. Mara's voice was calm but commanding. Everyone, follow me, we're getting out now. The crew moved quickly, trusting her implicitly. Blake covered their rear, scanning for any sign of Voss or automated defenses. Then came a warning light. A panel near the core flashed red. Voss had triggered a final safeguard, a fail-safe that would compromise the sub's stability if they didn't act fast. Blake glanced at Mara. We're too late. Mara's eyes narrowed. Not yet. Follow me and don't stop. They sprinted down the corridors, the sub groaning under pressure. Sparks and steam filled the hallways, and the crew followed closely, fear and urgency etched on every face. Voss's voice echoed through the ship, distorted and mocking. Running won't save them, Mara. It's all part of my plan. Mara didn't respond verbally. Her hands moved over a secondary console, inputting override commands. Blake watched as the subsystem slowly stabilized, the tension in the metal walls easing just enough to prevent immediate catastrophe. The crew cheered softly, relief washing over them, but the danger was far from over. Voss had not been defeated. He was restrained, but his mind remained a lethal weapon, and Blake realized the mission was not yet complete. Suddenly a hatch slammed shut behind them. Blake spun, gun raised, but the path forward was clear. Mara's eyes flicked to the hatch. She didn't hesitate. Stay with me, we're almost there. They reached the escape pod bay, a small chamber with pods designed for rapid ejection in emergencies. The crew moved quickly, boarding the pods with relief and fear in equal measure. Mara checked the last pod, then turned to Blake. You ready? Blake nodded, heart hammering, as I'll ever be. Mara strapped in beside him, activating the pod's ejection sequence. The Raven shuddered violently, alarms blaring, sparks raining from above. Blake held on, adrenaline surging as the pod detached from the sub, shooting toward the ocean's surface. Below them, the Raven groaned and twisted, the strain of Voss's sabotage finally taking its toll. Blake's stomach lurched as the sub began to tilt, water rushing into compromised compartments. Mara's hands remained steady, guiding the pod with precision. They broke the surface, the ocean exploding around them in waves of white foam. Blake gasped for air, the tension finally easing, but only slightly. They were safe for now. Mara looked out at the dark horizon, eyes sharp. Voss isn't finished. He's always thinking, always planning. Blake swallowed. We stopped him tonight, right? Mara's jaw tightened. We stopped him for now, but he's a ghost, and ghosts never stay buried. Ocean stretched endlessly around the escape pod, dark and foreboding, the night sky above punctuated by faint stars barely visible through the storm clouds. Blake Rourke leaned against the wall of the pod, soaked from the waves that splashed over the hull, heart still pounding from the chaos inside the Raven. Mara Dalton sat beside him, hands resting lightly on the console, eyes scanning the horizon. She was calm, but Blake could see it in the subtle tightening of her jaw, the minute tension in her shoulders. Surviving Voss once had been miraculous. Surviving him twice, that was sheer willpower. Blake broke the silence. We did it right. The device is stable, the crew's safe. Mara's gaze didn't leave the dark horizon. Safe for now, the device is contained, yes, but Voss, he's still out there. Blake's stomach twisted. He had felt the weight of Voss during the mission, the predatory focus, the psychological games, but seeing Mara so unshaken yet wary was sobering. He realized then that stopping Voss wasn't just about physical confrontation, it was about enduring the mental chess he waged against every opponent. The crew huddled in the other pods, shaken but alive, whispering softly, glancing at Mara with awe. She had saved them not through brute force alone, but through precision, experience, and raw instinct. Blake saw it in their eyes. They recognized what he already knew. Mara Dalton was a legend, and she had carried the weight of a decade's worth of ghosts into the darkness and returned. Suddenly, the pod's communication system crackled to life. A voice, distorted but unmistakable, filled the small chamber. "This isn't over," Voss said. His tone was calm, eerily casual, but every word was a threat. "You think tonight proves anything? I've survived worse than this, Mara, and I always will." Blake's hands tightened around the console. He's alive. Mara didn't flinch. She leaned back, voice steady but low. "Yes, and he'll keep coming. That's what makes him dangerous." Voss's laughter echoed over the system. Enjoy your victory while you can, it's fleeting. The game isn't over, and when the time comes, I'll find you, always. The line went silent, leaving an oppressive quiet in its wake. Blake exhaled, tension coiling in his chest. The realization hit him hard. Surviving tonight had been only part of the battle. Voss wasn't just a man, they were dealing with a ghost, someone who had already proven he could cheat death and manipulate every variable to his favor. Mara stood, motioning for Blake to follow. The pod was moving toward the rendezvous point for Navy extraction, but Mara's eyes never left the horizon. We've survived the immediate threat. Now we regroup, assess, and prepare for the next phase. Voss won't stop, he's patient, he's relentless, and we have to be better. Blake nodded, respect and awe mingling with the exhaustion weighing down his body. You're incredible. I've never seen anyone. Mara cut him off, her expression firm. Don't praise me yet. We're alive, yes, but being alive doesn't mean we're safe. He's out there, and every advantage he's ever had, he's still calculating. We've won the battle tonight, but not the war. Blake glanced at the horizon again, the ocean dark and endless, realizing she was right. Voss wasn't just a rogue operative or a brilliant strategist. He was a force, a shadow that could strike when least expected, a ghost that Mara, and now Blake, would have to confront again. The Navy's extraction team appeared on the horizon, lights cutting through the darkness like beacons of safety. The pods were lifted aboard, and the crew was ushered quickly to medical and debriefing areas. Blake followed Mara, who moved with controlled urgency, eyes still scanning the surroundings, hands still lightly touching her weapon, even though the immediate threat had been neutralized. In the debriefing room, the crew recounted the harrowing ordeal, how the sub had been manipulated, how the device could have caused a catastrophic detonation, and how Mara had fought Voss inside the corridors of the Raven. Every story painted her as almost superhuman, a figure capable of facing impossible odds and surviving where others wouldn't dare. Blake watched Mara listen quietly, absorbing every word but revealing nothing of the personal toll the mission had taken. He wondered how many ghosts she carried, how many memories of comrades lost, missions failed, and battles survived alone. After the room emptied, Mara stood by the large observation window, looking out at the night sky and the calm surface of the Pacific. Blake approached cautiously. "You saved them all," he said softly, "including me." She didn't turn. "I did what had to be done, that's all. The rest is history." Blake hesitated, and Voss, he's still out there, he'll come back. Mara's eyes, still on the horizon, hardened. "Then we'll be ready, we always are." For a moment silence fell between them, a silence heavy with unspoken understanding. They had survived the mission, rescued the crew, contained the device, and survived Voss's lethal traps. Yet the memory of the rogue operative's presence lingered like a shadow, a reminder that victory was temporary, survival precarious, and the war far from over. Blake finally broke the quiet. "Do you ever rest?" Mara's gaze shifted to him, a small, almost imperceptible wry smile tugging at her lips. "Rest, not really. You learn quickly that ghosts never stay buried, Blake. They linger, they test you, they wait, and every time you think you're safe, they remind you that survival isn't permanent." Blake swallowed hard. He understood then that Mara Dalton wasn't just a survivor. She was a sentinel, a fighter who carried the weight of history and the consequences of vengeance, a woman who faced ghosts, and sometimes those ghosts were alive, calculating, and waiting. The Navy command arrived to debrief her personally. Admirals and senior officers, previously in awe of her after the initial reports, now stared with a mixture of reverence and disbelief. They had seen the footage, the pod data, and the sub's internal logs. No one expected a single operative to face Voss inside the Raven and come out alive. Mara's presence, skill, and determination had not only saved the crew, but had prevented a global catastrophe. Yet Mara didn't seek accolades. She gave brief answers, her mind already racing through protocols, damage assessment, and potential contingencies. Blake realized this was who she was, always thinking, always calculating, always preparing for the next impossible scenario. As the night deepened, Mara and Blake stood on the deck, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. The stars glimmered faintly above, cold and distant, and the weight of the mission settled into a quiet, uneasy calm. Blake broke the silence once more. "You think he'll really come back?" Mara's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Yes, and when he does, we'll be ready, always. Ghosts never stay buried, Blake, but neither do we." Blake nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The danger was far from over, but for tonight they had survived. They had faced impossible odds, battled a predator thought dead, and emerged alive. And yet in the shadows beyond the horizon, Aldrich Voss lived. He watched, he waited, calculating his next move, knowing that Mara Dalton had survived him tonight, but that tomorrow the game would continue. The ocean was quiet again, deceptively calm, carrying the promise of both survival and the lingering threat of vengeance. Mara Dalton, Blake Rourke, and the rescued crew knew one thing: the battle may have been won, but the war and the ghosts were far from over.